this ruling from the judge, it also appears that Donald Trump's two eldest sons, Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump, who were running the company while their father was in the White House, both boys, David, on the hook for $4 million apiece. Now, the other part of
What
this
the
ruling from the judge,
fudge?
92 pages that our team is poring over at the moment, it says that Donald Trump cannot do any business related to real estate in New York for 3 years.
Yes.
And each of the boys,
Finally.
2 years apart, can also not do business in New York. David,
Oh, so sad.
Only for 3 years. You should have banned him for life.
Ban
from
him.
the Trump family
Ban
that maybe
him.
the boys would not be built into this ruling with dad because of some of the comments that the judge had made over the weeks-long proceedings. That maybe the boys would be held out of it. That could be a way to keep the company going, if you will. Just basically take everything that was under Donald Trump and slide it to his children. But this ruling, David, makes that impossible. It means that Donald Trump and the boys cannot do business in New York. And I can tell you, David, that one of the things that was being considered amongst Trump Tower is if that was to happen, what would happen to all of the employees of the Trump organization? That has been a big concern, David.
So let's just bring the audience back up to speed here. John, stick with us here because, again, the judge here in New York City in the civil fraud trial against Donald Trump has now handed down the ruling, the damages here. And as you heard John just report, our investigative team pouring through the decision from the judge. Initial read of this shows that the former president, Donald Trump, has been fined $354 million for civil fraud. The Attorney General of New York City
Okay.
$70 million. The judge coming very close
70 million?
to that, $354 million. As John just
President
reported
Biden
there, it
must
would
be doing
appear
the dance.
at this point
I
that
think
each
Biden
of
is
the
doing the
youngest
dance.
sons, Don Jr. And Eric Trump, have both
No one's
They
too.
can't do
$4
business
million
in real estate
each.
in
So do the
that's
math
too
there.
bad. I
That's
wish it was all business.
354.
Yeah,
plus
but
8
Trump is going to
million
lie
gets
through
it
his
to
damn mouth and say,
$362
oh, they're
or so
bullying me.
in
Help
damages.
me.
Look at
Both
me.
Donald Trump
Everyone's
and his
picking on
two
me.
sons.
I should have
And
won
as
the
John points out,
election. I should
all
be able to
three
do
of them
business in New York. Oh my God, yeah.
Hey, my goodness,
And
gravy me.
Georgia, where they taped my voice, that was like, they hacked that, man.
That wasn't
Yeah, he
me.
called the governor of
I would never want to
Georgia,
do
and
the.
I don't think you know, during the election, when he lost,
Really?
he called Georgia, the governor of Georgia, and he recorded it. And he said, I need 150,000 votes. You can get me 150,000 votes, right? And he's like, no, all the polls have already come in. I can't do a thing about it. Yeah, you can. You're the governor. You can, like, you could fabricate something. And he was like goading the guy to lie so that he could get reelected.
Oh, brother.
Yeah,
And
he
Trump.
set up two, and he targeted two black women that said, who worked at the polls and said it was all their fault. People egged their house, the people that like Trump went after these people, their lives were in jeopardy because Trump targeted these two women. And
Oh my
they took
God.
him to court and won.
Good. Good. Good for those women. Yuck, he's an orange greedy head.
New York properties, and many of them are established properties. People would know them in New York City and even beyond. But look at Mar-a-Lago. They had claimed that Donald Trump said Mar-a-Lago was worth.
Oh, please, that's not even compared to his father giving him $10 million for an allowance.
In Palm Beach for that same property, the assessed value was just $27 million.
Oh my God.
Holy shit.
$573 million off.
Oh my God.
The Attorney General was getting at, Aaron, is that that kind of exaggeration, even if the argument is who did it hurt? Well, the Attorney General said it hurt the marketplace, other businesses in the marketplace. And if the average Joe or Jane out there in America can't inflate the value of their home or their business, then Donald Trump and his sons shouldn't be able to either.
That's the argument. That was exactly the argument. You and I can't lie about our finances to get a mortgage, so Donald Trump shouldn't be allowed to do it either. And there were repeated examples, not just Mar-a-Lago. There was his Fifth Avenue penthouse apartment in Trump Tower. On his financial statements, former President Trump tripled its size and therefore its value, said it was 30,000 square feet. It was about 10,000 square feet. His Seven Springs estate in suburban Westchester County, north of New York City. The Trumps said it was $261 million. The assessed value is below $30 million. And these exaggerations, the judge said, are not mere mistakes. It's not just differences of opinion. It's outright fraud.
When you talk about how many years they've been prevented from doing business in New York, I'll bring this back to John Santucci. It wasn't for the rest of their time actually as businessmen. When you look at these, the age of the sons, obviously, when they're told a couple of years each prevented from doing business. But Donald Trump, and there's been a lot of focus on the age of the candidates in the race for president, both President Biden and former President Trump. When you're talking about Donald Trump, whether he wins or not, if he doesn't win, being prevented from a number of years from doing business, that would be a substantial punishment as well, just
I feel
simply
like
given
he's
his
gonna get
age.
elected.
Yeah, obviously, David.
He's not going to get
Obviously,
elected after seeing this.
what it
You
looked
know what?
like
He
in
got found
2015
guilty
is very
of
different
sexually
than what it
abusing
looks
women.
like now in
Yeah.
And people still
2024. I mean,
voted for
Donald
him.
Trump
Why
sits
would
out
people
COVID
vote for
as
him,
later
even
on.
he's sexually assaulted and he's a greedy pig
They're all
of
allowed to get
of
me.
money
I'm a
and stuff?
victim.
Obviously, his life
I'm
down
a
in Florida,
victim. It's
all
all
of
the
his children
Democrats. They're
now
all out to
reside in
get
the
me.
state of Florida. They all at one
No
point
one's
lived in
out
New
to
York.
get him.
I
He
can
needs
tell
to
you
take
that as a
responsibility for his
Republican, I
actions
am
like
I have a
normal
family.
people. But
George Trump,
apparently, money
the
clouds
president's
people's
son,
judgment.
obviously, who's a part of this ruling by the judge here in New York. David, Eric Trump telling me that the ruling, in his opinion, is a total joke. Called it insane. Said it feels like, David, they're living in an alternate universe. And David, one of the things that Eric Trump points out to me just now on the phone is that, as he testified under oath, he remains and continues to stand by his testimony that he does not recall, ever believing any of the information he was signing off on was fake, was altered, was any type of scheme. So obviously, as we expected, and Eric Trump just confirmed to ABC News, the Trump family, David, is already saying they will appeal this decision by the judge, and obviously we'll have to see how quickly they move on that.
And what's their defense? And I'm sure you didn't have time to get into it on the phone, but when you talk to the Sons, for example, this argument from Letitia James that they were operating in some sort of alternate universe, that's the allegation here, that they were inflating assets in a way that the average American just isn't allowed to do.
Yeah, and David, their argument is that they maintain that they ran a clean business. They point to different sales and transactions they've had that have been a success. One of the things that Donald Trump and both his children have pointed out to me over the years is the recent sale he had of the old post office. David, the former president, making over $400 million on that sale after he had refurbished the old post office and eventually sold it to Hilton. So that's one example they point to, David. These were properties that were sought out by others when they did sales. They also recently point to a golf course here in New York that they sold for New York residents, the one where you drive over the Whitestone Bridge. They recently sold it to one of the casino giants for, I'm told, just under $100 million, David. So that's the success that they point to. These were properties and assets people wanted, so thus, in their mind, the evaluations that they attached to them were legitimate.
One quick question, John, for you before we move on to the rest of the team here and then get it back to our stations across the country. When you're talking about $354 million in fines for just the former president alone, put this in perspective. How much money have they spent, has the former president spent on legal bills already, the number of cases that he now faces while he's running for president? How much of this money is actually coming from people donating to the campaign, actually footing the bill for these legal bills?
David, a lot of it. I mean, if you look at calendar year 2023, when you, Aaron, I, all of us were on the air going through the series of indictments, Donald Trump was expanding how many lawyers were on his payroll. And we know, David, because of those campaign finance reports that just came out over the last couple of weeks that we reported on the show with you a few weeks ago, that Donald Trump and his team have spent over $50 million on legal fees, on attorneys. Some of the attorneys, David, that worked on this case, the New York Attorney General's case, made millions of dollars directly because of their work for Donald Trump. And you have to recognize, David, look at just the last few weeks of coverage we've been reporting here on ABC. Donald Trump's legal troubles, we know the courts at the moment, right? Manhattan, Georgia, the two federal probes. But look at just a couple weeks ago. Donald Trump's team was in New York. It was in the Supreme Court, rather, focused on the 14th Amendment appeal. New lawyers were brought on for that. Special attorneys that were barred to appear before the Supreme Court. You got to know, David, that they too were dipping into the campaign cash.
Not only that, but the E. Jean Carroll case in recent weeks and the amount of money fined in that case as well. A lot of people are going to start adding up these kinds of numbers and simply ask, where is this money going to come from?
Absolutely, David. And I think that's the thing. Look at where it has happened every time Donald Trump was indicted as a key example, right? We did it together 4 times, David, on the air. Donald Trump was indicted. They came out with a statement. Shortly thereafter, an email blast came out to supporters, fundraising, trying to pull in funds. Donald Trump's team bragged about the millions of dollars they raised after each indictment. And David, that money that was raised, all 50 million of it, went to pay those bills.
John Santucci with us, John Carl, our chief Washington
Isn't that
correspondent,
against the
also with us.
law?
And John, there was a
Hello?
lot of
Yeah, that's against the law.
on this particular case alone and Donald Trump's behavior in that courtroom, admonished by the judge, fined by the judge along the way, and it figured into this decision.
It sure did. And David, before I get to what the judge said about it, just think about it. He spent upwards of 10 days in that courtroom. He testified. He would come out and give his daily press conferences. He was using the courtroom as a way to be part of his campaign. But look what the judge said about Trump's testimony in this case. Overall, Donald Trump rarely responded to the questions asked, and he frequently interjected long, irrelevant speeches on issues far beyond the scope of the trial. His refusal to answer the questions directly, or in some cases at all, severely compromised his credibility. So Donald Trump's time inside that
He should have.
in the midst of a presidential campaign, using it as a way to boost his political prospects, it appears hurt his legal prospects. Again, the judge saying that his testimony, very strong language here, severely compromised his credibility. And one of the things that Trump talked about constantly in those press conferences that seemed to be fixated on was the value of Mar-a-Lago, because he was accused of overstating the value of Mar-a-Lago and insisted that it was worth well over $1 billion. This ruling takes some time to explain why that is simply not true. The judge explains that although Trump said Mar-a-Lago was worth between $1 billion and $1.5 billion today, he said that the judge says that would require valuing it as a private residence, which the deed prohibits, and it would have to make it the most expensive private residence listed in the county, Palm Beach County, by approximately 400%. And the judge explains, and this is important with the Mar-a-Lago property. Again, I mention this because this is something Trump has been fixated about, talked about not only in his appearances outside that courtroom, but talks about it in his campaign rallies. Trump signed two agreements with the government regarding Mar-a-Lago to limit his tax exposure. One was a 1995, a deed of conservation and preservation, where he gave up the right to use Mar-a-Lago, he or any other owner, for any purposes other than a social club. And a secondary deed, another deed in 2002, where he gave away in perpetuity the right to develop or use the property as a single-family residence. So that enabled Trump to significantly lower the taxes he would pay at Mar-a-Lago, but it means you can't subdivide it and put a bunch of homes, private residence on there, which is what you would need to see the value being as high as it is. But look, bottom line, Trump has used this case and the other cases on and on and on for his campaign. But in the courtroom, the judge sticks to the rule of law, sticks to the ruling, and is saying that Trump has actually hurt his own credibility with his own statements.
John, let's just talk bigger picture here politically, because we've seen the polling that Americans, when they're polled, who they choose, and obviously we're still far out from election day in the race for president, but when they talk about a conviction on some of these criminal counts, and again, this is not one of those cases. We are still awaiting the Jack Smith trial, the trial in Georgia, the hush money case here in New York. We see how the polling suddenly shifts when people are asked, would you vote for a convicted felon? Now, in this case, this deals with another part and a huge part of Donald Trump's image, which is what he's really worth, what his businesses are worth, what he's worth as someone who prides himself in decades of doing business here in New York and beyond. When you see him called out, if you will, by this judge for grossly exaggerating the value of his properties and now being held accountable. And again, the numbers here at this hour, Donald Trump has now been fined $354 million in this case. Both sons fined $4 million each, which takes you to about $362 million. Donald Trump and his two sons have been fined for exaggerating the value of their real estate. Does this poke holes in that image for those who support Donald Trump? Obviously too soon to know, but again, this is a big part of the image that he presents on the campaign trail.
Well, Trump's entire political life is an outgrowth of his contention that he is the greatest, most successful business genius, that he is fabulously wealthy because he is fabulously successful in business and would bring the same business acumen to the government. But what you're seeing here with this incredible judgment, again, accusing him, first of all, of exaggerating his wealth, but also getting to the point where there's a real question whether or not he could even pay these fines on top of the fines that he is forced to pay
I
in
will
the
get
Ian
it.
Carroll cases. Not to mention all of the legal bills which John just went through and that he is using his political fundraising to help pay for. I mean, Donald Trump's image as a incredibly successful, wealthy businessman is
I think we need
also
after
very